campfire to tell stories. But if you're not careful, your eyes will start to play tricks on you. You start to wonder what you're seeing out in the shadows. Wonder what it is you're hearing crackling through the trees. Tonight, we're going to explore what it feels like to tell those ghost stories around the fire. Sit here under the stars and hear some scary stories. And the first story we're going to hear tonight comes to us from David Humpel. David is a retired U.S. Navy officer, spent his career working on submarines. Think about that, how tight that would be. And tonight, he's going to tell us a maritime ghost tale.
Awesome, good evening. It's dark out here in the woods. Came prepared. I'll be honest with you, I'm an engineer by trade. I'm an analytical guy. I don't really believe in ghosts. At least I didn't until it was back in 1996. I was aboard the USS Topeka 754. We're about 30 feet below the surface of the ocean, doing about 3 knots to nowhere. Off the coast of an unnamed country, in the middle of that unnamed country's entire battle group, running full-time wartime exercises. So, needless to say, it was a treasure trove of intelligence to be had, but silence and the need for silence was paramount, because to be found out, well, that could be bad. So, of course, a very critical pump aboard the submarine broke when we were on station, and it had to be fixed, and the captain tasked me with fixing this pump. But he said, Petty Officer Humpel, you understand the importance of maintaining silence while you do this. Yes, sir, I do. I understand what happens if I make noise. We'll be found out. We'll have an entire opposing country's battle group on top of us during peacetime. Not a good idea. So, I get to repairing this pump, and it is an 1,100-pound pump.
It's about this big.
And so I've got rigging gear with chain falls and come-alongs and straps and pulleys. And because it's a submarine, there's not a lot of clearance. And so I've got something special rigged up. And I get this pump rigged all the way up until I run out of strap. There is no more. I cannot move it any further. And yet, I am just 1/8 of an inch past the foundation bolts to get the pump off. And I can think of only one thing to do, and that's to pry it up over with a crowbar. And so I get a crowbar, and I jam it up underneath the pump. I give it a push. Oh, pop, comes over the edge. Ooh, it was at that moment I realized I had made a horrible mistake, because now this 1,100-pound pump is swinging at me at full speed. And it's going to hit the wall, and it's going to make a sound that only the Liberty Bell can make. It's going to be loud. So not even thinking, I decide I'm going to jump in front of this pump and stop its motion. And I lunge forward, and something pulls on my leg and stops me from going forward. And at the same time, the pump, which was in full motion to hit the wall and make a loud, resounding noise, just stopped and came to a rest, defying everything I knew about physics. I couldn't understand it. And then I was overcome by this cold chill that hit me to the bone. And I heard, bam, I got your back. What was that? What grabbed my pant leg? What was with that cold breeze? Like I said, I'm an analytical guy, and I thought to myself, nah, it couldn't be anything supernatural. There must be an explanation. Maybe I caught my pant leg on a pipe hanger. Maybe as the pump was swinging, the submarine had tilted and stopped the swing. Maybe I got hit by a cool breeze, or maybe it's just the adrenaline rushing through my body, knowing that I almost died. was no sound, and I got the pump off. And I repaired the pump, and I got it put back together, and we continued on our operation. We had a successful mission undetected. But I'm still not a believer in ghosts at this point. Yeah, there were some weird things happening, but it could be explained. But I'm going to fast forward 2 days later. I'm standing a watch station they call engine room forward. Engine room forward is on the lower level of the submarine. It's all the way forward, up against the reactor compartment bulkhead. And I've got the midnight to 6 in the morning watch. It is cold, it is late, I am tired, and I am alone because I won't see anyone for six hours on this watch. And so I need to explain that we have on a submarine what we call, they're nuclear powered. We have a 150 megawatt, that's enough power to power a city. We have a 150 megawatt reactor on board. It is all contained within a shielded, locked reactor compartment. Why is it locked? Because obviously you can't be inside the reactor compartment when it's operating, because it wouldn't take but an hour or so before you were overcome with radiation. All the cell walls of your body had broken down, and you would literally just melt to death right on the spot. And so I'm standing this watch, and part of my checks on this watch station are to look through what we call the RC, reactor compartment periscopes. Now these are long periscopes that penetrate the bulkhead, thick glass made out of mylar, so it protects your eyes from the radiation coming through the reactor compartment. So we can make visual checks to see if anything's leaking, if there's anything, bad signs of stuff going on. And it's normally a pretty normal, boring check. You check, everything looks good, mark it off on your logs and continue on your way. So I go to make my first check, and I look down, it's about this high. I could have sworn I just saw something move in the reactor compartment. It was like a shadow. Well, that's stupid. There's nothing in the reactor compartment. If there was something in the reactor compartment, it would be dead. So there was nothing moving. So I go to look again. What? I'm looking at something that is like dark red. It almost looks like it's moving. What? It almost looks like a rat's eye. It's dark, it's got a beady black center, it's glossy, it's moving. That's impossible. Number one, it's too big to be a rat's eye. Number two, nothing could be living in the reactor compartment. We covered that already. What am I looking at? So I look again. Nothing. It's all clear. Everything looks normal. Boring, like every other check I've made in there. So I spend the rest of my watch trying to figure out what just happened to me. And needless to say, I had that same cold, chill to the bone feeling that I had just a couple days before. But I thought to myself, coincidence, yeah, it scared you. Maybe that's what that feeling was, but there's nothing in there. Everything can be explained. So I thought long and hard, and I came up with a solution. It must have been a red piece of duct tape that had been left in there and was blowing around, and that would explain the shadow that I saw move, and then maybe the wind just blew it up against the lens of the periscope, and then when I looked back, it had blown away. Because we have like dark red, they call it magenta, duct tape that we use for radioactive work. So that would make sense to me, and that's how I was able to explain this to myself. And so I get off watch, and I'm telling my buddy Scott, I said, hey Scott, I think there's a loose piece of duct tape in the rack compartment. We need to put it on the list next time we go in there to make sure we get that and find it, okay? He goes, yeah, no problem, I'll put it on the list. And so, inevitably, it's, in the middle of the night, and we're shooting the proverbial, what, and we just start playing I wonder what would happen if. And so the topic came up, what would it be like to be locked in the reactor compartment while it was operating and actually die from live radiation exposure? It must be excruciating. It must be a horrible way to die. And Scott looks at me and he goes, "You know that happened, right?" I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, some dude, his name was like Earnhardt or Easter or something like that. He actually died in the reactor compartment during new construction when they were doing their 100% operation test," which is like a test where they operate the plant at 100% to make sure that everything operates the way it's designed to. Well, I guess old Earnhardt, at least that's what he said, is what he's telling me. Something about he fell asleep, he was hiding so they wouldn't see him sleeping, and they did a check and didn't find him, so they locked the reactor compartment. They went live with the reactor, and basically he was burned to death by live radiation. I'm like, "Oh my God, what a horrible way to die." He goes, "Yeah, it's actually in the snot book." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Well, the snot book on any ship in the Navy is an unofficial log held by the crew that is passed hand to hand throughout the life of the ship of all the stuff that you're never going to see officially documented. And so he comes back later with the snot book and he goes, "Here, this is the guy right here." And he hands me the book. And I start reading it. It is a beautiful drawing of the pump that I had just repaired. And apparently this is the guy that had originally installed it during new construction. And he gave detailed instructions on how to rig it out and everything else. And there was a big note. "But there's not enough clearance. You're going to have to use a crowbar to get over the last 1/8 of an inch." I couldn't use that information. And then it said, "Caution, but make sure you strap the backside of the pump because when you do, it's going to swing." Why didn't I read this beforehand? And it was signed by someone named Jimmy, B-I-G-Y-B, I-Star. Jimmy, B-I-G-Y-B, I-Star. Bam, I've got your back. That freaked me out. I couldn't really explain that one, and I kind of just held it to myself. I said, "Well, that's cool, Scott, but this tells me about the brine pump." That was a pump I fixed. But what it doesn't tell me is about him dying in a reactor pump. He goes, "Yeah, you got to flip a couple years later. Right here." And I read this account of how he fell asleep and they didn't find him and they locked him in the reactor compartment. They went live and they operated at 100% power for 24 hours. And when they went back in, they found Jimmy I-Star dead. But the scariest thing about the story was that the radiation had burned his eyes to where they started to bleed. And because all the fluid was coming out, they shrunk. And so they turned almost a dark red black. And the pupils were shrunken from the radiation and it made his eyes look just like, in the book, a rat's eyes. What? Here's the kicker, though. If you were paying attention, you would have realized that Jimmy I-Star spelled backwards is rat's eye. And it wasn't Jimmy I-Star that was pulling my leg. It was me pulling yours. Thank you.